Welcome to another race analysis. This one also from the Cal Aggie Crit of 2020. This time it's just the Cat 3 race instead of the Cat 3-4 race. And I have Amber Pierce from Cannondale with us.
Hello, hello.
And Pete Morris from Team Cliff Bar Racing.
Howdy, guys.
And let's get into this one.
So here we are jumping in. This move has just come back, and you were part of the kind of bringing it back together.
Mm-hmm.
But this is one where you can see how strung out everybody is behind you. And so it was a hard move. But you do a great job of kind of slotting back in and not forcing yourself to the front like you had been over the previous handful of minutes.
Yeah, the previous 13 or so. In other words, the whole race up to this point.
But as this race slows down, and this is kind of the portion of the course where it's a lot easier to make the effort to move past people and be sheltered and just create your race from the easy side of the course rather than the hard side of the course.
Mm-hmm.
So you're doing the right job of hanging out in the wheels and getting ready for what's to come. Yeah,
and it was slowing down here quite a lot. You can see like the wattage is pretty low, and I was enough kind of the right distance back. I just felt like it was like on paper it was the time to attack.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So I attacked. Right?
Exactly. No, it was. I mean, you had the element of surprise, so you had that whole shot that you took on the inside there. And the beauty of that was it wasn't a huge space that you went through to accelerate. So even if somebody was following you, you couldn't have 5 people following you. Mm-hmm. So I think you timed that really well. And again, you came from far enough back that by the time you passed into the peripheral vision of the people that you were passing, you were going way faster than they were. So that gives you that advantage right off the bat.
And it was hard leading into it. You were on the right side. It was a bunch of like you said, on paper, that's a perfect time to attack.
Perfect time to attack.
Yep. And then I knew that we had these 2 riders up just ahead of us, and the rider that's in the front in the red Penn Velo kit was, as soon as I saw him go off the front, I was looking out there, up ahead on the course, and I saw his position on the bike, and I was like, oh, he's like a time trialist for sure. He was just so comfortably placed on the bike, and he looked like he was
super aero.
Yep, putting out a really good, solid effort, and he was off the front in the beginning of the race. If you thought I was making it hard, that guy was off the front for the first 4 laps. And everybody was really excited that he was off the front and wanted him to do really well, which I thought was interesting. And he had multiple teammates in this race. Mm-hmm. Really, it was like a 21 rider field, and there was a team of 5 and a team of 4, and he had the team of 4, I believe. So once we caught up to them.
Yeah, and that was a good move of riding through them.
Should we rewind that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Let's go back to where we catch him. So as you're coming up on him, you can see the guy in the back is struggling a little bit, and obviously the rider in front is more powerful. So it's really ideal where you get a little bit of draft from both of them and just ride past them, because the idea being if they're strong enough to be in your breakaway, they'll make it, and if they're not, they won't be there anymore.
Yeah, mm-hmm. and I let them know when I was coming that I was like, hey, latch on.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Even just that 1 or 2 second heads up makes a big difference when you're being caught.
And again, this has a lot to do with where you are in the race. So this is early in the race. If this break is going to work to the finish, you're going to need people in the break to help you make it stick. Whereas if this were 2 to go, you might not want to give them that heads up, right?
Yeah, exactly. Hit him with surprise, right? In that moment.
Right. So in this moment, your interests are aligned in that you want more horsepower in the brake to make it stick.
Yes. Something interesting, too, at this point, I had kind of glanced back, and I had seen that the riders that were chasing not chasing, but sitting on the front, so to speak, they were all the rider behind me, the Penn Velo rider. They were all his teammates.
So there you go.
So I was like, okay, so maybe they're going to hold it off, right?
Right. Speaking of making the brake stick, if you know that somebody's got teammates in the field who might be chasing, you want one of those jerseys in your breakaway, because it automatically neutralizes that part of the chase. And that's a lot of horsepower that's now not going to be trying to close the gap to you.
Yeah, so I thought maybe this one could work, right? I was looking forward to it. And I wanted to see if we could stretch the gap a little bit here. But then once this rider started pulling through, his poles were really soft. And he even was so bold as to take a drink on the front.
Oh.
Yes. So
must be easy.
Yeah.
Not very stealth right there.
Yeah. And at one point, I asked him, I said, are you committed to this? And he was like, yeah. And I was like,
of course I am.
Yeah, that's not solid commitment. So, because there's kind of 2 ways you can go about it in a break, right? Amber, if you want the brake to succeed, Probably
Right.
don't want to make it punchy and unsustainable.
Right. So if everybody in the break, the ideal scenario is that everybody's 100% committed to the break. And in that case, what you want to do is have everybody keep the pace of the break as high as possible, which means that you don't want to be surging every time you pull through on the front, because that really hurts the legs of your break mates. Like, you want to be using each other's energy as efficiently as possible. But when you have somebody in the break like that that's not committed, and when they go to the front, they're actually dropping the pace, that's really disruptive to the break. And that's where you maybe want to punish them a little bit.
Yeah, I figured I knew that Chaz would be able to hang in as he bridged with me, and knowing his fitness level, I knew he'd be able to hang in. So in my mind, I was like, yeah, maybe just us two. We can make it work.
Right, his fitness level and his experience level, right? Because he's going to see the same, he's seeing the same thing that you're seeing.
Yes.
So when he sees you surging, he knows exactly why you're doing that. And that's the cool thing about racing with people that you know.
Yeah.
You have that understanding without ever saying a word.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So that was and basically at this point we kind of thought, all right, let's get rid of him. So, and it, we'll see what happens there. But an interesting point on this too is our order. We switched up our order there coming into that chicane, and this is a good point that when you're in a breakaway, just because you're in the order you are, it doesn't mean it has to stay that way.
Right.
And coming into that turn, I spoke up and I said, let Chaz go to the front. And if Chaz and I can go to the front, we'll be faster through the chicane. Because in that case, Chaz he's an ex-pro motocross rider and turns very well and doesn't seem to have much in terms of fear. So he's able to go through turns very well.
Chicanes.
Yeah, there you go.
So I wanted him to be leading through there. And that's kind of like you might have the same thing if you have like a really light climber. You probably don't want them to be the ones pulling you up a hill, right? If you're in a break.
Or if you're a really tall person like me and you're in a break with a lot of really small people, you might want to find the tallest wheel and just slot in on that one. And if you kind of you can always reshuffle the order a little bit as you need to. So there's a lot of things you can do to sort of massage things in your favor.
Yeah, you want to re-optimize all the time.
Yes.
Right? Like just because you are the way you are, there's always a time to re-optimize and re-optimize and re-optimize.
Yep.
So I guess I'll spoil this one in terms of this break. It doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
Spoiler alert.
That break was reeled in that I was in earlier. We've been in the group, and I've tried to kind of survey to see like how everybody is doing. It's still been punchy. Not much has changed. It's kind of the same race, just over again. The deck is reshuffled.
Reshuffle.
So we're going to come into this section here, and this is another situation where like things feel like it's right to attack, and when the things line up, sometimes you just end up doing it. But there's some interesting points I think that we can get from this one. So right here, it slowed down. I had a clear path off to the side. It's actually like sheltered, almost like sheltered wind, so to speak.
And again, you're jumping from several wheels back.
On your strength on the course, which is another, this hill into the chicane is totally ideal for you.
And you had like a 1,000-watt spike there, and then, but you're not dropping, you're continuing to stay on the gas here, and that's, the key to opening up a gap on this stuff.
Not just going hard really quick. But
right. Like, yeah, you can throw down a hard sprint. That's great, but you've got to stay on the gas really hard. The hardest thing in a breakaway is to initiate and establish the gap. Yeah. And then, so it's always the first part of initiating and establishing a breakaway that's the hardest, and you really have to commit to it.
There's that same rider. Once again, he was off the front again.
Yep.
And
just blew right by him.
Yeah, he looks confused.
No hesitation. I love it.
I knew that he wasn't committed, so I was not going to sit behind him.
Yeah, that's perfect. And so as you're looking behind you, you probably had 100 feet after getting through the chicane, more.
Stretched really quickly.
And your power is still really on, which like Amber was saying, the kind of first 60 or 120 seconds after you start your breakaway is the most crucial point where you have to stay on the power.
Right.
At this point, I had looked back. I had seen where everybody was, because there was kind of like where the course turned on itself. And honestly, I just said, uh-oh. Because I wasn't planning on, I think that we had 8 laps to go here, and I was not planning on going solo 8 laps to the finish line.
That's like 15 minutes left in the race.
Have you ever found yourself in that position before where you're like, uh-oh, like I attacked, now I have a gap, like,
yeah,
what do I do with it? Because like part of me was like, well, if I just shut it down and then I just go back in, I just wasted a lot of energy. So I guess since I have a gap, I might as well go for it and see if I can make it stick, because there is a chance. Like don't cue the Dumb and Dumber quote, but there is a chance.
There's a chance.
Yeah. There's a chance, right? And since I'm already here, I might as well not let all of that energy expenditure that I put into it be in vain. How do you kind of weigh that if you find yourself in that position?
I think you're doing the right thing where you're not pedaling super hard by yourself, and you're maintaining your gap. And the way the race is shaped up to this point is there was motivated people who are willing to be in a breakaway. So you're far enough off the front that you're enticing to people who want to be in a breakaway, and you've proven that you're willing to work because you're still out there.
Right.
So there's kind of this magical leash where if you're somewhere around 20 or 30 seconds, people can still bridge up to you and still be able to work. And so I would probably I wouldn't work, well, it's really hard to decide. 15 minutes left in the race, do you go all in and just hope? But that's a tough call, and based on the way people have been racing, it was also hard up to this point. So
it's a tough one. I mean, oftentimes in races, you get in a situation like this where there is not a clear answer. There's no like racing rubric where it's like, if this happens, do this. If this happens, do this. Because every situation is so different. And so, I mean, if there were 50 people in the race versus 20, that changes it because the power dynamic is different. There's a lot more power behind you than there is in your breakaway. In any race, if you're off the front by yourself and 10 people start working together behind you, I don't care how strong you are, you're not going to be stronger than 10 people. So if you know that there are teams in this race, which you had a couple of teams back behind you who were working together, so you know that probably at least 3 or 4 riders are working behind you together, and that's a lot of power and that's a lot of efficiency that you don't have in a solo breakaway off the front. On the other hand, you created this advantage.
Yeah. And the weird thing was, at this point, it just kept getting bigger.
Right. So
at this point, it was around 30 seconds.
You created an advantage for yourself. And I feel like in racing, you never want to waste an advantage. And in this case, so you're kind of put in this conundrum of, okay, it's going to be really hard and probably unlikely that you're going to hold this to the end. But again, you never know. People might be tired. They might be looking at each other. They might be cat and mousing behind you. And you have an advantage. So I just personally like the mentality of racing forward. And I like what Pete said too, because when you're out there, you're a rabbit, and there's always the possibility that people will actually bridge across to you as opposed to welding the field across the gap to you. And in that case, it'd be really great because then you have a couple people to work with who are motivated. And so you're opening up other possibilities for yourself here. So I think you get in this situation and you make the most of it, which is exactly what you're doing.
I actually, once the break kind of got established and I realized that it was expanding, I was like, and I actually hit lap on my head unit to be able to like look at my normalized power, because I know myself enough that I lose track of what that is and I will push too hard. What feels good, yeah. And then suddenly it doesn't feel good anymore. And I found that with this point, it was somewhere around 290 to like 295-ish. I was like, if that's for my normalized power on these laps, if that's what I'm maintaining and I'm keeping it around there, it felt sustainable. And my pace wasn't really changing a whole lot. My lap times probably weren't changing. I was just trying to stay at something that I knew was consistent, because I kind of felt like this is, like to your point, Amber, there are teams back there, everything else. This is unlikely on paper that it should work, but the gap keeps growing.
Right. You just don't know. I mean, there's a whole lot of scenarios that can unfold here that would enable you to, stick to this to the finish. So you can't, it's not always a foregone conclusion.
And I think with 15, if you get off the front solo with 15 minutes left, really pay attention to the time gap and which way it's going, whether it's growing or shrinking. And if it starts shrinking based on your effort, if you know you have more left in the tank, you can always double down, especially if you can't sprint at all, right? Like if this is your only option, double down. Like all it takes is one person to throw his hands up at the front and say, why aren't you guys working with me?
Yeah.
And then it turns off, even when they get really close.
Even when they get really close.
Oh, man. Yeah, actually, Catherine Curie, one of my teammates back on WebCore back in the day, that's how she won nationals. She went off the front solo, and there was this, berserker chase, I think, from T-Mobile. I wasn't there. It was the year before I joined the team. And they came within 20 seconds of her, and then got complacent, and then there was some chit-chat, I don't know.
Are you going to do it, or am I going to do it?
Yeah, exactly. And the gap blew open again because she didn't give up, and she won nationals. So you don't know what's going to happen. It's never a foregone conclusion. And yeah, I like the idea of racing forward. And to the earlier point, when you're out here by yourself, there are those points on the course that bend back on each other, glancing back and seeing who's working, how organized are they. All of those things can inform the kind of effort that you want to put forth. This particular course doesn't have any really technical corners, but if you're on a course that's really technical as a solo rider, one of your huge advantages is being able to take the corners way faster than the group. So if there are things that you can do and work to your advantage as a solo rider off the front, and you know, again, you created that advantage for yourself, so you really want to make it work, take all of those advantages that you possibly can.
And that was definitely the case, even though it's not technical. I had noticed once again that like if I took those turns, when I took them by myself, big gaps would open up every time.
Yeah.
So it was like kind of
free
like
speed.
It's almost like if you can imagine like Sonic the Hedgehog, I was jumping through rings, right?
Yeah,
Like, when I got there, I was like, yes, cool, that'll help me
Power up.
Yeah, exactly. But so I think it was 6 laps. We can even play it at like hyper speed here while we go through this. I think it was 6 laps off the front by myself, and it certainly felt like 6 laps. It was uncomfortable, and we ended up rolling through. And I saw a rider bridging to me, which was Chaz, and I was like, interesting. But there's a big temptation whenever you're hurting in your solo and you see a rider just like bridging to you, big temptation to be like, ooh, I should ease up so they could catch me.
Ooh, yeah.
What say you on that sort of thing, Amber? Like, what's the right thing to do?
I would say just keep the pace that you're going, because if they're gaining on you, they're gaining on you at whatever pace you're going. I don't think that, you necessarily need to sit up to make it easier for them, because it's going to make it easier for the field behind them too.
Yeah.
Race forward.
Yeah, you're giving up time, right? Every time you sit up, you gave up time you've already fought for.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
Race forward.
Yeah, so I chose that approach and just kept it on, and I saw him coming, but then the bad news is he was coming, but then it also seemed like that was incentive enough for the rest of the field to kind of think so too, because there were like 3 stragglers long behind him and then the whole field. And they were getting closer, and they really closed the gap down pretty darn fast.
Yeah,
we can probably fast forward to that moment.
Kick the hornet's
Let's
nest.
do it.
So at this point, I looked back and I saw that the field was getting very close. And so I kind of knew that like, okay, this is I'm going to get caught. I eased up here because I knew that the chase was absolutely going to catch me.
Right.
They were within reach and very close. And the GoPro cameras always make everything look further away than they actually are. They were very close in the chicane. So I was like, all right, I'm going to get caught. What do you do in this scenario when you get caught like this?
I would wait for the counter.
Yeah, I would move to one side of the road so that you only have to look over one shoulder. And yeah, exactly like Pete said, you can anticipate that there's going to be a counterattack. So by moving to one side of the road, you kind of force everybody to go up and around you on one side. You can slot into more wheels maybe a little bit more easily, and you're only having to look at one side of the road for where that counter might come from.
When I didn't get counterattacked here, I took that for a sign, whether that was bad or good.
Well, and there's only 5 minutes left in the race, so I mean, it's crunch time now.
If you were catching me, Pete, in that situation, if you were in the field and catching me, would you have counterattacked over the top of me?
Even if it was just a soft one, I think I would have done it, because you should punish people. We should punish you.
Yeah.
And
for sure.
And if everybody's really tired from chasing,
that's a great time to attack.
Great time to attack.
So that's what I took that to mean, is that if nobody counterattacked me, one of two things: either there's no racing, or the racing nous isn't quite there, right? The experience, or number 2, they're tired.
Yep.
And just by looking at how everybody was riding and everything else, I was like, wow, everybody seems like they're fairly tired. And they did close it down. Like, it was very big and got very short very quickly. So it was probably done with a lot of intensity.
Yeah, and that makes it hard. And people, you can see that on people's faces when they catch you.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. So I was anticipating. I was like, okay, I'm going to get counterattacked, but it wasn't counterattacked. So at this point, it was kind of like, reshuffle the deck. I guess we're going to go into a replay.
Just a couple seconds ago, you were so nicely tucked in the draft, and here you go to the front again. I'm cringing. I'm cringing right now, Jonathan.
I know. And this is like probably a good example of the fact that when you feel fine, you sit on the front and you're like, everything's fine, right?
Until it's not fine.
But then if the riders had savvied up here and like thrown on really hard attacks on me or anything else, I probably wouldn't have been able to match it, even though I felt fine at this point.
But you're really vulnerable. You just put down a huge effort on your solo breakaway, and you had an opportunity here to sit in
Yeah.
Eat, drink, be merry.
We told Nate, if you're on the front, nobody else can make mistakes on the front.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
Right.
Like
well, and one part of this too is, so a counterpoint to this is the fact that I thought, okay, and this is once again a lack of efficiency. But if nobody attacked me and everybody's tired, I'm going to go through to the front on the chicane like I did, and I'll just make it fast. So then they have to do another acceleration, right? And that was the reasoning in the moment.
Yeah.
But it's not the sort of thing you can play with if your margins are slim.
Right, and
Yeah.
there you were on the front, so you were vulnerable to attack, so that attack went up the road, and by the time it came into your field of view, he already had a gap. And given that just happened, you're doing the right thing by giving other people the opportunity to do the work and shut it down. But if you had been 5-6 wheels back, again, you still have room to maneuver and get where you need to go. Plus, you probably would have been able to anticipate that attack and maybe roll up with him. I don't know, but...
Yeah, I think one thing you could do is sit fifth wheel and then do 5 hard pedal strokes and pass everybody into the chicane.
There you go.
That's a perfect one where you're not doing any extra work, but everybody gets punished.
Much better way to do it.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, and in that case, the rider that went up the front, I wasn't worried about it, sure. But you never know when a rider can actually make something like that stick, right?
Because they don't have to be strong to make it stick. All that has to happen is everybody behind them has to say, oh man, I don't want to be the one to shut this down. We're coming into the closing laps of the race. Like, I want to save it for the sprint. And if everybody's looking at everybody else, those moments of hesitation are all that it takes to give a rider that advantage.
Yeah. So and once again, this is a good example of being like critical of your performance because you can find so many different little spots for grabs, efficiency grabs. So this, like, the pace was ramping up, and it was one of those Penn Velo riders, and I honestly expected that one rider who went solo to do like a long bomb with 1 or 2 to go.
Yeah.
It's very much, I thought, within his wheelhouse.
That's a great assumption to make based on how he was racing.
Yep, so I figured that he was probably going to do something. The yellow rider, and I think that we're actually on the last lap here coming in. This is the last lap. The yellow rider that went, I wasn't particularly concerned about that. The riders going up, I was really waiting for one of the team members to go forward on those two, and I figured that would be a point where I would actually have more concern about a move. But this is like the hard thing where you're basically you're placing bets. And you sure hope they're the right ones to make.
So this is where you're fighting for position leading into the sprint, and I kind of like to call this a dogfight. It's the dogfight for position before the sprint ever starts, and honestly, the sprint is usually won in the dogfight. And this is where people make the classic mistake of, the sprint is coming, so I don't want to stick my nose in the wind. But now is when it doesn't matter what happens. The only thing that matters is your position. So you've got to get yourself in position for that sprint. So yeah, you're doing a little bit of work here. You've got right. You're not. There's riders on your wheel, but you've got to put yourself in position for the sprint, no matter
I fought
what.
for that right here.
Yeah, exactly.
I knew that I needed to be second or third wheel,
and
there
again.
you go. And you fought. Yep. And that's exactly what you need to do. There you go.
I yelled at him to sprint because he was soft pedaling. I was like, "Don't get there, close off the line, and then just sit up."
Right.
Because that's it. Yeah. And this was kind of like, I was worried that the race is going to end up in a similar fashion, because if you look at the earlier race from the 3-4 race, it's basically the same.
Yep.
Right?
And now see, this is great. I love how you run the line and you accelerate in the draft to slingshot yourself across the line, which is just awesome.
And then you make everybody have to go all the way around you, which is nobody can.
Yeah. So so this is a good example of racing. We've covered this with Nate before. Racing a bit like without a leash, so to speak, and you can always tighten things up and be even more efficient.
Yeah.
So
But nice job.
I know.
Thank you.
It's great. I mean,
Thank you.
what's so cool about this is you won, but leading, all the way up to the finish line, we found a lot of places where you can still improve, and that's the cool thing about racing. You can always learn something, even from the races you win.
Yep, 100%. Thanks, Amber. Thanks,
Yeah.
Pete.
Yeah, of course.
And to your point, Amber, about you can't just sprint hard and expect the gap to open up, but you have to kind of stick with it. Let's look at the actual ride here. If we zoom in on like that portion of establishing and extending the brake here in TrainerRoad, you can see like it's high numbers the whole time for a minute.
Right. Like you put in a huge spike, which is that initial acceleration, your jump, but that's not enough to open up the gap and establish a breakaway. You really got to put in a follow-up dig for, as Pete said, 90 to 120 seconds following your first attack.
It's kind of funny too, because like right here, what's going through, you can graph your mind right here going into this. I'm like, oh no, get a little extra pedal stroke coming into that turn, right? Like that's what that is. And then chicane, coming out of the chicane.
Carrying a speed.
And taking those quick little breathers, right, in between them.
Right.
So it's not just like a big sprint gets you the break. You have to be committed to it and get your gap that way.
Exactly. The first part of the break's always the hardest.
And then you earn your gap after the hard part.
Yes, true. That's true.
If you like that video, you can subscribe down below to our full playlist of race analysis videos and give us a thumbs up if you like the video.
Yeah, and give us a comment. Let us know what you think, what else you might have done. We want to hear from you.
If you want to get faster, go to TrainerRoad.com.